You can look completely stable right up until one normal expense changes the emotional climate of your entire month. Not because the number is huge, because in 5 seconds it reveals how little room your life actually had. A car repair, a pharmacy run that costs more than expected, a school payment you forgot was due this week, a broken appliance, one rent increase that does not sound dramatic enough to call a crisis, but still forces your entire month to bend around it. That is the moment a lot of people realize something they have been trying not to see. Their life is not stable. It is just uninterrupted. And that is a darker way to live than most people admit, because from the outside, everything can still pass as fine. You are working, paying the bills, keeping the household moving, looking like a responsible adult. But the second one normal disruption lands, the truth surfaces fast. What looked like stability was often just a stretch of life that had not been tested yet. That is why these moments feel heavier than the number itself. The expense hurts, but what really hits is the exposure, because a stable life absorbs a hit and keeps its shape. A fragile life survives by sacrificing invisible pieces of itself. The repair gets covered, but something else waits. The payment goes through, but the rest of the month gets tighter. The problem gets handled, but the handling spreads damage somewhere quieter. Nothing explodes, everything adjusts, and the adjustment is where the truth lives. A plan dies before it becomes a conversation. Something basic at home stays unfinished again. A purchase that would have made the week easier becomes irresponsible by default. A card absorbs the hit, and the future absorbs the card. The expense gets solved in one place and duplicated somewhere else where no one else will notice. That is not stability. That is pressure being redistributed so life can keep its appearance. And that appearance matters more than people realize. A life can stay presentable long after it stops being secure. Bills still get paid, the routine still functions, you still show up where you're supposed to show up. From the outside, there is enough order to pass. Inside the month, there is less and less margin for reality. That's why decent weeks do not always feel peaceful. They feel unchallenged. There's a difference. Peace lets the body loosen. A life with no margin never really loosens, it just waits. It learns to treat calm as temporary and relief as something that can be revoked without warning. That is one of the deepest damages here. You stop trusting calm. You stop receiving decent moments cleanly. Even when nothing is wrong, part of you is already rehearsing what the next interruption might cost. You hesitate before saying yes. You check before spending. A normal purchase carries the shadow of three other things behind it, not because you're dramatic, because you have learned that one routine decision can destabilize five invisible ones. That changes how a person moves through life. A text message can create tension before you even open it. A phone call can feel loaded before you know why. Something small breaks, and your first emotion is not annoyance, but instant internal math. Somebody suggests something harmless, and instead of reacting from desire, your mind races ahead into the structure of the week. What is due, what already feels thin, what will have to absorb this if you say yes. That is not normal caution. That is life teaching you that ease is conditional. And once you live under that condition long enough, your personality starts rearranging around it. You become faster to postpone yourself, easier to deny, more practiced at sounding casual while quietly narrowing your own life. You tell yourself you are being disciplined, practical, low maintenance, but some of what you are calling maturity is adaptation to constant exposure. You are not just becoming more responsible, you are becoming easier to compress. That is why this pressure reaches identity so fast, because repeated fragility changes what you believe about your right to relax, your right to want, your right to trust the ground beneath your own life. It teaches you that stability is something to imitate, not something to inhabit. And that creates a very specific humiliation. Not the humiliation of obvious failure, the humiliation of looking fine while privately knowing how little it would take to expose the truth. A dramatic collapse at least announces itself. Other people can see it. False stability is different. It keeps you socially legible while privately overloading you. You still look functional enough to be treated like you are safe. You still sound normal enough to be expected to absorb more, which means you carry not just the pressure, but the burden of making the pressure unnoticeable. That is labor too. A lot of the exhaustion does not come from the expense. It comes from maintaining a version of yourself that does not reveal what the expense actually did. You still answer the question, still make the call, still show up sounding normal. Meanwhile, your mind is pulling pieces out of the month in real time, deciding what gets postponed, what gets reduced, what gets swallowed quietly so the rest of your life can continue looking intact. People call that composure. A lot of the time, it is choreography. And the longer you live inside choreography, the harder it becomes to know what stability is even supposed to feel like. If every decent month depends on timing, restraint, and luck, then what exactly are you calling stable? Continuity, maybe? Presentation, maybe? Delay, definitely. But safety is something else. That question cuts straight into adulthood, because adulthood is supposed to mean more than keeping the machine alive. It is supposed to create some ground under your feet, some sense that your labor is building a life that can absorb reality when reality arrives. Not a luxurious life, just a life that does not feel one interruption away from private exposure. When that never really happens, effort starts losing part of its dignity. You still do what needs to be done, you still keep things from collapsing, but it no longer feels like you are building protection. It feels like you are delaying impact. The control is real, the safety is not. And once that becomes visible, a lot of false self-judgment starts to crack. If one ordinary expense can still throw your whole life into panic, the deepest problem may not be that you are weak, careless, or bad at adulthood. It may be that you have been measuring yourself against a false version of stability for so long that you started treating your fear as a personal defect instead of accurate information. Because the fear is saying something precise. This life only works when nothing touches it too hard. The structure underneath your routine is thinner than your appearance allows you to admit. Your body learned the truth before your language did. That truth is not comforting, but it is cleaner than shame. A lot of people are not living in security, they are living in interruption delay. Delay of disruption, delay of exposure, delay of the moment one ordinary expense finally reveals how much of their stability was really timing, restraint, and uninterrupted cooperation from reality. And when you live like that long enough, the final damage is not just financial. You begin to mistrust your own decent moments. You stop feeling protected by your discipline. You confuse vigilance with maturity, because vigilance is the only form of stability your life has allowed you to practice. That is the lie worth breaking, because if stability only exists while nothing happens, that is not stability. That is fragility with good manners. And once you see that clearly, something important changes. You stop blaming yourself for not relaxing inside a life that was never built to absorb ordinary reality. You stop calling your tension weakness. You stop treating your scanning like a character flaw. The truth is heavier than reassurance, but far more useful than self-blame. You are not overreacting to one expense. You are reacting to the moment it became impossible not to see how conditional your calm has been. That is why this hurts so much, not because life collapsed in some dramatic way, because one ordinary moment showed you that what looked like stability was often performance more than protection, continuity more than safety, interruption delay more than peace. So if your life looks stable from the outside, but one ordinary expense can still make everything feel exposed, do not rush to translate that feeling into weakness. Sometimes the reaction is the clearest thing in the room. Sometimes it is the only honest response to a life that has been calling itself stable while asking you every single month to survive by staying calm inside fragility.